Before I get on to today's episode, just a reminder, everyone, if you've never left a rating and review for this particular podcast, please consider doing it today. It would really give the show an SEO boost. It helps with the algorithm. And platforms like Apple, Spotify, they actually use listener feedback as a bit of a guide on who they should and should not recommend the show to. So if you've been enjoying the podcast, you've been listening to it for a while, please give it a rating review. I would really appreciate it. Now, let's get on with this particular episode. Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and welcome to this week's episode of the Podiatry Legends podcast. With me today are three DPMs from the United States. I have Dr. Ben Pearl, Arlington Foot and Ankle in Arlington, Virginia. Dr. Patrick Agnew, who has Coastal Group Podiatry, Virginia Beach, which is also in Virginia. And Dr. Patrick Deheer, who is the president-elect of the APMA. So welcome to the podcast today, the three of you. And today we're going to be talking about podiatry in the past, podiatry currently, and podiatry in the future. And because you're all from the United States, it's going to have a very much United States slant. However, if you're in another country, stay tuned in, because usually what happens in one country tends to happen in one of the other ones. So welcome on board, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Tyson.
Thank you. Ben, I'm going to start off with you because it was your idea to actually do this podcast. So give a bit of background on what your thinking was.
Yeah, so the thinking is podiatry, I mean, we're at the quarter century mark, right? So for 2025, and podiatry has been, what, about a 75-year profession, something? I think we're talking late 60s. Is when it became more modern and surgery centers. And then I know that it wasn't until about 1983 or so that they had outpatient surgery. It was inpatient, right, for a while. And we had this big groundswell, right, of AO techniques and so forth that happened. And then somewhere along the lines of the last 30 years after that, there was a lot of cross-pollination with other specialties, and also to some extent you could argue dilution, or other entities became more interested in the foot. We had foot and ankle fellowships with orthopedics. Nurse practitioners have become interested in wounds. Physical therapists are more interested in foot and ankle. Running foot and ankle clinics, run retail, sometimes serves as a triage first line for some injuries. Maybe not by how the states would view it, but de facto, because it's so available. And then even like the likes of your corner good feet store or something of that nature, where sometimes there's technicians. So what I've noticed, and I was in public relations for a while, the APMA used to have public relations to highlight the best and the brightest of what's happening in podiatry. And it was my job in my state to pick out interesting stories of people doing unique things. And I found this one story. I remember I did a write-up for a doc that had taken an old movie theater and converted it into a half clinic, but then half sort of retail support that was related to the foot. And I thought it was a genius idea. It was called 1 Foot, 2 Foot, a guy by the name of Matt Dearman. And I wrote an article in a trade here in the States, but we talk internationally too, called Podiatry Management, which has been a nice beacon. But I know that Dr. Deheer, who's going to be president of our national association next week, has done a nice skeleton. And I'm interested to hear from him about the implementation of how we're going to get some more excitement when we've had challenges with people getting interested in medicine. And I think seeing sometimes from some practitioners that just get caught up in the grind of insurance and aren't excited in special topics like Pat being excited in Ehlers Danlos and pediatrics. So I thought that Dr. Deheer could lead it out.
Okay, just so everyone knows, one Pat is going to be called Pat. The other Patrick, we're going to refer to as Patrick. So now it's Patrick Deheer. And I always say, I love having royalty on the podcast, just to let you know. Doesn't happen very often.
Well, I'll be president of APMA in March of 2026. I'll actually be the 100th president of APMA. So that's kind of just a unique thing that I got positioned for. And I'm looking forward to that. It's being on the board of trustees has been really a highlight of my career. It's a 13-year track. So it'll be my 12th year. I'm in my 11th year right now. I'm president-elect. So back in the APMA House of Delegates in 2023, there was a budgetary action item to create a independent organization to address our student recruitment challenges here in the United States for podiatry schools. And I was put in charge of that. So it's another thing that I'm kind of dealing with. I'm also a residency director. We have 4 residents per year, 12 residents. I work in a big national super group. Just some background information on me. I called Upperline Health. I was a team podiatrist for the Indiana Pacers for 30 years. And like Pat Agnew, we both have a passion for pediatrics, and we share that in common with each other. So and I've done a lot of international work actually too. I've been on 30 international trips. So I have had a really great career. I love podiatry, and I'm super happy with my career. It's exceeded my expectations. My father-in-law was also a podiatrist, and he passed away last May in 2024. And I love podiatry, but he loved podiatry even more than I did. And he was a traditional podiatrist. He did a little bit of surgery, but he did a lot of biomechanics and a lot of just routine care, but he truly loved podiatry. So my love for podiatry is genuine based on my career experiences, but also my father-in-law too, and his experiences. And so when I was asked to be in charge of the student recruitment organization called the Foundation for Podiatric Education, we seated our board with members from each of the key stakeholders in the profession in the United States. And then we started to implement a plan that I had been working on even prior to that. There's been some good research in the U.S. that our student recruitment our challenges have been based on marketing. It's really a marketing problem. You hear a lot that podiatry is the best kept secret in medicine, and I've never understood why it was such a secret because there's so much, I think, to it. So we interviewed 4 data analytics firms and 4 large marketing firms. And we ended up hiring a company called JPA Health out of Washington, D.C. that did both of those things. And for about 2 years, we worked on the data analytics and research component of it to build a marketing campaign for this. And our research confirmed the other studies that the Arizona school did and the New York school did, that it's a marketing problem, that people just don't know about podiatry.
Before you go any further with that, though, I think it's important to point out that if you are unaware that in Australia, trying to get students to know about podiatry and be interested in podiatry, when I talk to people in Canada, the United Kingdom, it's the same problem across the board, that the marketing of what it is that we actually do and the exciting parts of what we do,
right,
students are just totally, or school students are missing out on it, and they don't realize how good it could be.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. And part of our marketing research, like as we were getting towards the end, we were doing some very deep dives with particular groups of undergraduate students. And several of them, because we had these kind of ongoing conversations with them and different questionnaires and surveys they were filling out, several of them are like, now we're interested in podiatry after we've learned something about it. So that was really interesting side note on that. But we developed this marketing campaign called Podiatrists Move the World. That's the tagline. And I'm really excited about it. We rolled it out about 2-3 weeks ago. And we're trying to help bump up this last few months of this group of students who will be going into podiatry school in August. And then we're also using this to sort of field test our marketing campaigns to see what messages are resonating or not resonating, so that when we roll out phase 2 of the campaign for the next calendar year or academic year, we can modify the marketing campaign as needed. So we're really excited about this. And through this process, it's been interesting. The first 2 years was really esoteric because it was about data and research and getting people on board because it's expensive. Our budget's about $1.5 million. It was $1 million for the first year and $500,000 for the second year. And we were tasked as a board to raise that money. And it's difficult when you're talking about research and data to have people give money, but when you can show them like a glossy ad and an email drip campaign and social media posts, that gets people super excited. And once that stuff started becoming available for us based on our research, it was all market tested. None of this was anybody's idea. The market told us what the messaging should be. The market told us what the coloring should be. The market told us what the graphics should be. And so it was all based on that. Then some of my fellow colleagues from in the U.S. approached me and said, maybe we can take this to a larger profession branding campaign. And that's what we're working on right now, is developing that, where all the key stakeholders are going to give a substantial amount of money if we can get everybody on board for this to elevate the entire profession. And I'll give you an example. APMA stepped up to the table at our House of Delegates meeting in March. Our House of Delegates approved APMA's component of $2.5 million towards this marketing campaign or branding campaign for the entire profession. Based on all the other key stakeholders, we really need to be in the $10 to $12 million range to have an impact. And a really interesting side note on this is that osteopathic medicine did this about 15 years ago. And look what it's done for osteopathic medicine.
Oh, yeah,
it's
definitely.
really elevated that profession. I had a branding campaign, and
Can I just ask what the message was that they identified? What was the message they needed to get out to students to make them think that podiatry was a great choice?
So there's a couple things. First, you had to identify who those student targets are.
Yeah.
And we identified three groups. One are MCAT takers, two are pre-health science majors, and three were college athletes. And those three groups were selected based on their characteristics and interest and compared to what podiatric surgeons in general, like Patrick Agnew and Ben and I's personal interests and things that drive us. Those things were based on research and put together. And that's where we came up with the three groups. And each one of those groups has a different targeting message and different influencers in their lives. I will tell you one of the things that really resonated with the research, we interviewed about 500 or 600, I can't remember the exact number, undergrads, and then we interviewed about a couple hundred podiatry students, was being a surgeon before 30. That was something that really resonated with them. Also having a guaranteed pathway. Everybody talks about, well, not everybody wants to be a surgeon and not everybody in podiatry is a surgeon, and I get that, but there are non-surgical orthopedic surgeons, there are non-surgical vascular surgeons, and non-surgical general surgeons who do wound care, whatever. So that's something that you can get into deeper, but that was one thing. Another thing that resonated with them was that you knew your specialty going into it. You can say you want to be an orthopedic surgeon, but the truth of the matter is getting a residency in orthopedics is very challenging. It's very competitive, and there's a high chance you probably won't. And particularly if you look at the percentage of osteopathic students, 80% of them go into primary care. Very few of them go into surgical specialties. And that's because it's so competitive for the top surgical specialties like orthopedics, dermatology, ENT, those types of things. So that knowing your specialty was a big thing. Another thing that was a tight-knit community. Another thing that resonated with the people that we surveyed was high board pass rates. A big thing was that we basically have 100% residency match rate. That's not the same for osteopathic or allopathic medicine. That was another big thing. So those were some of the main factors that we came out of our research that made podiatry appealing to prospective students.
Okay, so the first part was identifying the groups. And I like how you mentioned that all three of you, obviously sport has been a big part of your life. And I would say more than 50% of the guests I've had on this podcast, when I asked them what got them into podiatry, there's this really big sporting background. It's sort of how they were exposed to it or when they were investigating it. So I think it's really important that they actually identified, especially that group of college athletes.
Absolutely. And the thing we found out about the college athletes is they're not necessarily aware of podiatry, but they are aware of the importance of your lower extremities and how lower extremity injuries can affect your ability to participate in your given sport, and the importance of proper medical care and preventative care too. That's a big thing with them. So once they see that we have podiatrists that work with professional teams and high-level colleges and U.S. track and field, that becomes very interesting for that particular group.
Okay. So Pat, what has been your experience through your career so far of just seeing where podiatry's been, where it's going, and have you noticed anything as well?
Well, I think I'm the oldest practitioner here, and I have seen protean changes in the profession from where I started working with Dr. Ganley, who was a pioneer. He and Dr. McGlamory both went into the military and learned their art side by side with orthopedic surgeons. Dr. McGlamory stayed in the National Guard, and I think he's a brigadier general. Dr. Ganley had his career in the Navy working with an orthopedic surgeon named Bundens. He already had a degree in podiatry, and the Navy really didn't know what to do with a podiatrist. So they said, well, you can be an officer, but you'll be doing administrative tasks. And he said, well, what are my other options? And they said, we'll give you advanced rank as an enlisted person. You work in the orthopedics department. And he then went on to state hospitals and worked on a lot of children and got a lot of special needs kids who were doomed probably never to walk, got them up and moving. I actually lectured in Australia at one point.
Okay.
He used to laugh about the fact that the guys 10 miles away in Pennsylvania said they never heard of him, but people in Australia had heard of Dr. Ganley. And I guess that's a business thing.
Also like in Australia, Australian podiatrists, especially like myself, the era that I went through, we really paid a lot of attention to what was happening in the United States. So given the magazines, Podiatry Management magazine, I've been getting that for 33 years. Every month it turns up, I read through it. So I'd always knew who was doing what over there, and I'd always kept a really good eye on it. So there were certain names that always popped up. And I think a podiatrist in Australia really paid attention to that because we were, I think, earlier on in the profession, looking for guidance on what to do next.
All right. I've always found it appealing, the kind of pioneering aspect of podiatry is still alive. Dr. Deheer is in the process of eliminating some of that by bringing in evidence-based medicine on such a strong foot. But we still do a lot of things kind of instinctively, seat of the pants. And I think we've come up with some, in many cases, better ways to treat foot and ankle issues than we would have if we were locked into a more structured traditional medical model. And I hope that's something we never really lose. I always talk about how the poster sessions at national meetings don't need to be strong data posters in every case. They don't need to prove anything. If they just purport a theory or an idea, I think there's room for that. And certainly in examples like really niche areas like pediatrics or connective tissue disorders, where I don't know if anybody had done anything before Dr. Ganley. I don't know if anybody, well, I guess Dr. Tax had really pioneered pediatric podiatry, but it's still a pretty new thing here 38 years later that I've been involved in it. It still is foreign ground to most of our colleagues. And then connective tissue disorders, I've been working on that for over 30 years, and still I don't know how many young podiatrists would even think about that. You're taught to think about fractures and tumors and infections, but who thinks about collagen unless somebody points it out? And yet there are all kinds of foot and ankle problems associated with connective tissue disorders, and they're probably a lot more common than is recognized. So I love kind of being on the cutting edge of those things.
I like what you said, though, too, encouraging people, if they have an idea or a theory, is to put it out there. And I've always found that was one of the things in podiatry that sometimes stunted our growth, where someone would have an idea, they'd put it out there, but they would be attacked in a negative way, and therefore they go, oh, I'm just going to get back in my box. And that would actually frighten people from sharing their ideas, because they thought, I saw what happened to Ben when he opened his mouth, they jumped all over him. So therefore, I'm not going to do the same thing.
I wanted to speak to that point. When I started my career, I was lucky enough to get an appointment at the NIH, and it was a multidisciplinary clinic. And we presented our ideas, and they encouraged independent thought to process the problem in front of you. You would see an antalgic gait. You would see these rare diseases that you don't see anywhere in the United States. And they had a children's center. It is just an amazing thought process. And what I was going to say is that we had an orthopedic surgeon, we had a physiatrist, Lynn Gerber. She was the chief at the time of the rehab department. We had a physical therapist that had subspecialties in biomechanics. We had 2 legit biomechanics PhDs, and we would have these patients in the gait clinic, and they call it the foot clinic. Some of them would be more gait orientated. Some of them would be some rare disease, some immune disease. But the point of it is that we came to a consensus, and I wouldn't necessarily agree, but the point being that we all listened to each other's ideas. But to the point of what you said before, Tyson, of just being able to pursue a hairball idea and see if it has legs.
So Patrick, you were going to comment on this too.
Yeah, because this is real world. And example, I got very interested in clubfoot and doing international medicine. And I had some experience with clubfoot surgery that was suboptimal. So I wanted to learn about a better way. And I started going out to the University of Iowa, visiting Dr. Ponsetti. I went out there several times and got to know him. And his story is what Pat was saying, but it also incorporates doing research to support an idea. So in the 1950s, he came up with the Ponsetti method. And everybody ignored him. They thought he was a kook. And in the 60s, it was Kite's method, and that wasn't working. So in the 70s, they started doing PMRs, and they were doing those into the 80s. And then everybody was like, well, those aren't working. And then the 90s they came around, and they're like, what about that guy in Iowa? Maybe he had something. Let's go back and look at him. And then eventually it became the standard of care by the World Health Organization for clubfoot. Now, how did that happen? It happened because Dr. Ponsetti had an idea, and then he just kept putting research out and putting research out and putting research out to support what his idea was and to show in unequivocal terms it was the best way to treat clubfoot. And that's what people have to do. I don't mind being a little inflammatory on social media. I like challenging people. I'm very opinionated. I do a lot of different surgical stuff, and I'm opinionated. I don't mind going toe to toe with people, but I'm usually going to have the literature on my side. And then people get back, kind of push back saying, hey, well, what about innovation, like Patrick Agnew was saying? And I'm like, that's fine. Just develop some research to support your idea. And I know that can be difficult. I have resources as a residency director. I work at a large teaching hospital. That makes it easier for me. I can tell my residents. In fact, I told them today I want to start this new research project today that we're going to do a systematic review on the use of steroids for musculoskeletal pain in foot and ankle. There's really nothing on that. Like, how effective are they? I think they're very effective. So we'll find that out. But I think there is room for innovation, but I think then you need to take the next step and to use evidence-based medicine to support the innovation.
Okay, so you say if somebody has an idea, like Pat was talking about, and you have a theory, is to then, like within your own clinic, is just keep crunching the data, do your own research, put it together, and then present it to other people to get their feedback on it, and then keep working on it. Just keep working on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, an N of one doesn't mean anything, right? Like an N of one, I don't care about. But you can give me a data set that is real and objective. I've seen some articles that have been published in some really well-known journals that are just awful and embarrassing, actually. And they'll come out with a thing that says like a hallux valgus recurrence rate for Lapidus is 0.9%. They set up that study to get those results. And it wasn't that they were fixing the numbers or anything. Like, the numbers were what they were, but they set the parameters, which weren't standard for looking at recurrence rates for hallux valgus, to get that 0.9%. And then it being misused by industry to represent the Lapidus as a perfect procedure. And it's not. It's a good procedure, but it's not the perfect bunion procedure. There isn't a perfect bunion procedure. But I just think that you have to have good objective data and research. And it doesn't mean that you can't be involved with industry. Or I've developed a brace. I've developed a new surgical system for gastric recessions. But having peer reviewed, like if I have something and somebody else can replicate my data, now that's powerful. That shows that there's some validity to that research.
Okay, so we've got the research going and people have different opinions, which is fine. We have to, though, put that aside to attract people into the profession. I think people from the outside can't see bickering within. Let them see the bickering once they're actually in.
Oh, the bickering within is a really huge problem from a recruitment standpoint. There's no question about that. There's nothing wrong with academic debate and professional academic debate at all. And that's how we grow. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you have people going on anonymously to social media platforms, trashing podiatry, trashing what we're doing with the Foundation for Podiatric Education, because they think that the salary that we put in our website is too high. I can tell you that salary, it's very hard to pin down salary for podiatrists. And I understand people want to know the return on their investment, but there's no good metric for it. You can find it all over the place. I have 4 residents graduating in a week or so. 2 of them are starting higher than the number that's on that website, and 2 of them are going into private, they're going to work for hospitals. 2 of them are below it, they're going into private practice, but they have ancillary opportunities like surgery center ownership and things like that, that they'll probably end up getting over that number too. So that's not a huge end, but I can tell you from my personal experience and being a residency director and having resident after resident graduate, seeing the salaries that they're getting. And because they come to me and they ask me for advice when they're negotiating their contracts, those numbers are fair, I think. And that's why I was okay. So I was getting a lot of heat on social media about that number. And I think it's an honest number. And there are people who just want to sit back and pick at the profession and to be negative instead of doing something to move it forward.
Can I ask what the number was? Because there's going to be people listening to this going, what was the number?
It was like 273,000-ish.
Okay.
And I think that's pretty fair. Well, like I said, it depends on the practice type you're going into also. And do you have ancillary source of income available? I make more money from my surgery center ownership than I do from my practice. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, well, the podiatrists I know in America, I know some that make far less than that. And I know some that make 4 or 5 times more than that.
Yeah.
So it is a ballpark figure. And I think it doesn't matter what career you're doing, whether it's podiatry or something else, you will always get out of it what you put into it.
100%.
If you want to sit on your bum and do nothing, you're going to be at the lower end. If you actually want to get in there, learn. And I always say, don't focus on the money, just become a better podiatrist and the money just follows.
Yeah. Do what's right for patients, work hard. Yeah. And you'll be successful.
I wanted to piggyback also on that statement. When I was just coming out, there was a practice for sale in Virginia Beach, and I hadn't had the training like Pat Agnew did with Jim Ganley. We had a guy by the name of O'Donnell that did rounds at the osteopathic hospital because podiatry had inroads at the Philly osteopathic hospital on City Line. And so he'd take us on rounds with the newborns, and we'd see the club feet and the calcaneal valgus and so forth. He'd take us through the hip dysplasias and all that. And I had this interest level, and I saw that somehow I found that Pat Agnew in Virginia was very active with that. And just going down there, it didn't work out for the practice. He actually let me crash at his house at the time. And we've maintained, not only a friendship, but a collegial sounding board where if I don't have something that I'm as experienced with on a pediatric orthopedic case, I can text Pat. And if he doesn't hit me up because he's in surgery, he'll get me the next day and we'll discuss the case. And I can send the x-rays. Now we have all these modern ways that we can communicate. And it's just been a way that you don't have to restrict yourself to what you had exposure to in your residency or in your primary training. You can continue to develop your own fellowship, if you will, and just increase your knowledge and then use those tools to build on itself and then come up with your own tweaks of how you want to treat your patients.
What you're thinking, Pat?
That kind of interaction is mutually beneficial also. I don't know who said it first, but I know that you really don't fully understand something until you try to explain it to somebody else. And also, Dr. Ganley used to always say, if the student doesn't surpass the professor, then the professor has failed. So you need to just keep building and stand taller on the shoulders of others to get the profession forward. And I can't disagree with anything you've said, Patrick, as far as back to the evidence-based medicine. Absolutely want it. I just don't want to strangle the creativity in the process. And I wish someone could explain the kind of cannibalistic infighting that I have seen. Well, I've seen it in every profession. I've been in the Department of Orthopedics since very early on, and especially as a naval officer. I spent about 20 years in the United States Navy Reserve and several periods of active duty and deployments, and was around orthopedics all the time. And we actually had an orthopedic residency at our medical school that killed itself through infighting and fighting over who had control of the residents and that sort of silliness. So I wish someone here could explain to me, why would anyone within a given profession not be the best cheerleader for that profession and emphasize the excellent aspects of it, which I've already described what's exciting about it to me: the pioneer spirit, the opportunity to be on the ground floor of certain things, and of course everything that was said before about the fact that on day one, what you're going to be when you grow up, that on any given day you're a vascular specialist, a dermatologist, an orthopedist, a neurologist, a sports medicine guy, a surgeon, doing all of these things in every day. I haven't been bored in 40 years in my association with this profession. I've never had a single boring day.
I think as a mindset, I truly believe that any podiatrist in the profession that has a scarcity mindset sometimes has a slight bitterness attached to that. And if they see another podiatrist getting ahead, they want to tear him down a little bit. Whereas if you have a mindset of abundance, there's enough patients out there for everybody. And if we all work together and we all help everybody, then we're all going to benefit. And it helps the whole profession. It lifts the whole profession. And then people in the community actually see podiatrists working together and go, I want to be part of that group of people. Because look how well they actually get on.
One of the secret sauces for a prospective student to make that final decision to go into podiatry as a career is when they visit a podiatrist. The conversion rate is crazy high. It's crazy high. And why is that? It's because they visit a podiatrist, they see somebody that's happy, that their patients love them. We have a normal lifestyle. Another thing that I didn't mention that resonated with the prospective students was our well-being, like the profession well-being. Like as a podiatrist, we're not having to get up for the most part at 3 a.m. to go do something in an emergency room or do a surgery. Occasionally those things happen, but not very frequently. We have a pretty normal lifestyle. The subspecialization, you can work with professional teams, you can work with kids, you can do biomechanics, you can do diabetic limb salvage. There's so many, you can do dermatology like Tracy Vlahovic. There's all these different opportunities within the profession. I don't care what profession in medicine you're talking about, specialty or profession of medicine. And that's one of the things I think we need to talk about tonight. What is podiatry? Is it a profession in medicine or a specialty of medicine? I'd like to get to that. But there are disgruntled people in all specialties of medicine. And it's not just podiatry. It's just social media gives people a way to be anonymous and to complain and to bitch and to denigrate the profession behind this sort of veil. And nobody will come up. I'm a big dude. Nobody wants to come up to me face to face and say, whatever, talk negative trash to me, because that's not going to go over well with me. They know that.
I think your dad was a basketball player, if I remember.
That's right. But it's easy to be an armchair quarterback and to be negative. But I have too much. I've gotten so much from this profession and I love it so much. I believe in paying it forward, and that's what I'm doing.
You don't look that big on camera, but I'm going to take your word on it.
I'm 6'5", and
it is true, though. I pulled up in some podiatry groups. There were a couple of really negative podiatrists in there who were just bullying a lot of the younger ones coming through, and actually pulled them up on it with a podcast episode just talking about, are you a builder or a destroyer of the profession? And after I did that, I got so many emails from people going, thank you for doing that episode, and we know exactly who you're talking about. And it silenced them, I reckon, for well over a year. And I've only just noticed their heads popping up again. So it's probably due for another.
Tyson, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was listening to another webinar on physician burnout across the ranks, especially post-COVID. I mean, people are on a very short fuse, not only in the healthcare, but the patients walking into our practice, our employees. There's a lot of stresses on people. And so if we can't collaborate and work together as part of our own fraternal being of podiatry, I think that's a big problem. And I think that's why it's so important, this being the 100th anniversary of the APMA, I guess, presidency, that we have this kind of, not a total reset because we've been moving in the right direction, but just to highlight and continue that trajectory to aspire to be better. One thing I wanted to bring up that Patrick brought up is how important research is. I, as somebody that has not been in an academic institution or residency, find it a little bit more challenging. And so I keep my own sort of case series, if you will, but no control, right? Other than the people that opt out because they don't want to choose that method. And then you don't have any real data other than you can say, okay, so we had several people as part of a case series that did something. So I would put this to both Pat and Patrick. With the challenges of being extramural, and we used to use that term at the NIH, you had your intramural, the people that were in faculty at the NIH, and then the outside consultants. How is it that we can get the average Joe lunchbox like me more involved when there are ideas? Because let's face it, it's become a little bit more bureaucratic to try to do research despite best efforts by everybody. Companies aren't necessarily going to donate more than equipment. You go to like an Armstrong, and they need a budget. They can't just have the equipment. If you're looking at a wound care thing with a shock wave, they've got to have something to turn the levers of that big administrative component of doing the research. A residency program has a little bit more latitude because it's not as much for profit based on that, and there's a goal to teach the residents. So anyway, I leave it up to the two of you to think about ideas that might be ways to encourage more research from the groundswell up and not just from the kind of the academic institution beacons, if that's even possible.
Before you comment, Patrick, even though the research within podiatry is going to help podiatry, but it still comes back to how do we get what we're doing to the community and to the people thinking about, I want to become a podiatrist.
Well, that's probably more marketing and branding. I think the research part, I was going to see what Pat said, but research isn't for everybody. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of commitment. You have to have the resources and time and manpower / woman-power too. And you have to know how to navigate an IRB. You got to know I'm not a great at statistics, but I have people I work with that are great at statistics. So they can do that data part for me. So it really does take a team approach. And it can be difficult, like for a solo practitioner who may have a real desire to do that. But that's where they have to find allies in their state or local communities to work with and partner with, or even sometimes national. It gets a little harder nationally, as we've talked. But Pat, I'd be interested to hear your ideas on that too.
Yeah, so I published my first paper as a senior student. Someone stepped on a stingray, and they brought this child to our clinic thinking we would know what to do. And nobody at PCPM at the Temple School had seen a stingray injury, and somebody said, "Hey, Pat surfs, ask him." And I said, "Yeah, you put it in hot water." I knew from personal experience and from surfing for decades what to do with a stingray injury, but there really wasn't hardly anything in English literature on it. So I did a quick search and published a case report and got reprint requests from Europe and all over Africa, and there just wasn't anything in the literature. So that something as simple as that can be a very gratifying form of research. Anybody can put together a poster, and that's valid and seminal research sometimes. Shocked the heck out of me when Pfizer came to me 25 years ago and said, "Hey, you want to do clinical research for us?" And I looked over my shoulder, "Are you talking to me?" And they said, "I'm a podiatrist, right?" And they said, "Yeah, we not only want to do this, we want to pay you a lot of money to see if Lamisil is really a good drug, And it was very fun to be involved in clinical trials and done many of those for a number of different products and companies since. And then still today, I put together little papers or I co-author papers, and again, it really deepens understanding to try and explain something to someone else. The actual hard work of especially investigator-initiated research can be really daunting, but we should definitely encourage that within the profession. As also a residency director or former residency director, I'm a department chairman now, having a requirement of research in podiatric medicine and surgery residency programs, or at least an understanding of research principles, is a valuable part of the education process. I do say our clinical research or our research is our Achilles heel, no pun intended, but we in podiatry don't have enough of the storied research institutions that our collegial competitors have, and we don't have the bulk of literature that they have. And I'm not saying that the research that is published in other professions, other specialties, I can't wait to hear what Patrick says. Are we a profession or a specialty? But I think I'm envious of that. I think our residency program was one of the very first to be in an allopathic medical school at Eastern Virginia Medical School. And I'm glad to see more and more residency programs are affiliated with academic medical centers. But yeah, it's a weakness that we need to find a way to emphasize it. And yeah, we're going to recruit some young podiatrists that are going to want to do nothing but research.
I just want to say before Patrick explains about all the things that are happening at Ascension, how impressed I was with his residents. I had an idea, it was on Severs, and I was looking at some pulse electric magnetic fields, and ultimately you get into working on children, that's an issue. But then how are we going to find out if it works on children? And so anyway, there were all these things and then just different aspects of it. But what impressed me when I went through the IRB meetings was how much these third year, second year residents knew about the process, about the city's aspect of it. But just the thought processes and the workup and the going back and forth. And the way I look at it, even though that project didn't take off because of the constraints of doing it in that particular setting, it taught me something about thinking about the use of it, being more critical about my own methodologies, looking at some of the things I'm doing together. But the point being that I look in the next 10 years to see the program that Patrick's running in Indianapolis to be like the Cal Ripken of pushing out residents that are excited about research. And it's exciting to see them excited and to see them so welcoming and not looking at, oh, I got to do this meeting at 7 o'clock. I want to just eat my Lucky Charms and be off the case stuff for a while. And so that was nice to see.
What are Lucky Charms?
It was a cereal that was still popular.
I'm thinking it had to be something like that, because I'm going, eating his Lucky Charms and going, maybe that's just because we have some weird sayings over here that
It's
people.
a cereal.
Yeah, okay, it's a cereal. Okay, sorry.
I think it's banned in Europe because of additives.
Anyway, so Patrick, you were going to say whether it's a profession or a specialty.
Yeah. So part of this branding thing is going to be deciding on lexicon also, which I think we need to talk about. But also, I think when you're looking at the profession, I'm part of a task force that was just passed at the House of Delegates to look at where we were through Vision 2015 and Vision 21st Century, what we accomplished that we said we wanted to accomplish, and where do we go forward. And I think some of those decisions are based on what are we as a profession? Are we a profession in medicine or a specialty of medicine? And I will tell you, the specialties of medicine are defined by AMA. Whether people like to hear that or not, it's the truth. And I can say I'm an NBA basketball player, but if the NBA doesn't say I'm an NBA basketball player, I am not an NBA basketball player. And if you look on the AMA website where they list all the specialties of medicine, podiatry is not on there. So in my opinion, that means that we're a profession of medicine, and like dentistry, for example. And maybe that's what we want to be. This isn't really my opinion about what we should be. It's like that's the conversation we need to have at some point. And then if we want to be a specialty of medicine, we need to move more towards the AMA side of the line. Right now, podiatry is caught in the crossfire from scope creep regarding allopathic medicine and AMA in particular, and nurse practitioners and physician assistants. And they're trying to defend the turf of physicians, and we're in the middle ground. We get caught in the battle. And so whatever we do, I think personally, we should move towards the AMA side of the line if we can. But if we decide we are a profession in medicine, not just a profession, but a profession of medicine, and we want to go that route, that's fine too. Then how can we strengthen that concept, and how can we protect the future of the profession going forward as a profession as opposed to a specialty of? I think there's a lot of nuance in that, and it can get a little bit wonky in the discussion, but the bottom line is AMA says who specialties in medicine are, and they do not list us as a specialty of medicine. So we're a profession in medicine.
Okay. I like the definition. I like the description of it, but it's also every country is different on how podiatry is perceived and where it's perceived on the medical totem pole.
And that's where the lexicon comes into play. It's really important. I do a lot of international medicine. Like I've gone to Barbados. They wanted me to come down there because I have a crazy high amputation rate. They have 7 podiatrists there who are all non-surgical, most of them trained in England. But they realized one of the reasons their amputation rate is so high is because they don't have any surgical podiatry. So they asked me if I come down there. I took 2 residents down. We said, yeah, I think we can help and we can be part of the team. We're not here to make everything perfect, but we think we can improve the amputation problem you have down here. And the problem is the government doesn't recognize surgical podiatry at all. And when I've operated in Kenya and I've operated in the Philippines and places like that, in Haiti, I work with foot and ankle orthopedic surgeons from all over the world. And they're like, we have podiatrists in our country like Chile or Venezuela or South Africa, but they're not like you. You're different. So I think where lexicon becomes very important. We were chiropodists and then we changed to podiatrists. Now what's the next evolution look like? As we're discussing a branding campaign, are we podiatric surgeons? Are we staying as podiatrists? There are those fellowship trained people who say they're fellowship foot and ankle surgeons. Well, how does that differentiate us from orthopedic foot and ankle surgeons? But that is a discussion that the profession needs to have with itself. I have my own opinion. I think podiatric surgeon is the next step, but people who are non-surgeons have to understand that also is inclusive of them. That is not excluding them. Like I said before, there are non-surgical orthopedic surgeons, there are non-surgical vascular surgeons. But when you say podiatric surgeons, that aligns us in the house of medicine better. That's if you look at their general surgeons, they're, like I said, that terminology is really, I think, well accepted. And it's just educating the profession itself, but also then the public, what that means and all the sort of subspecialties of podiatry, which includes non-surgical stuff.
What you're thinking, I'll just throw this out there, because Patrick, I'm sure you're going to have an opinion on this, is about podiatrists going through the system where they do podiatry, but they don't do surgery. Because I have heard that discussion in America where they said there'd be more people may be inspired to become podiatrists if they didn't have to do the surgical aspect of it.
Yeah,
that does put some people off.
For sure. We converted to the 443 model about 10 or 12 years ago. I forget exactly the timing on that, but that was also to align us with the House of Medicine. That's the lowest term residency in medicine, whether it's internal medicine, pediatrics, or family practice, is 3 years. So we have the 443 model. And there are people now who think that may be a problem with our student recruitment challenges and that maybe it doesn't need to be that long. And maybe we should have 2 different types of residencies. We used to have all these different types of residencies in the US. Now we have just one type of residency, which is, I think, good for the profession. It's helped move the profession forward. But
is that now standardized across the United States?
Standardized across, yeah. Everybody has the same. Now, there's a slight nuance on that. Most programs have reconstructive rear foot and ankle. Not all of them, but I would say 90-ish% of them do. But that means that everybody has the same baseline knowledge, hopefully, when they graduate from postgraduate medical education. And then when they go into practice, they can just do biomechanics if they want, or if they want to just do peds or whatever, that's fine. And if you really want to subspecialize and do a fellowship, great. Do that. But I think elevating the bar is important, and we have to be on par with our allopathic and osteopathic colleagues. I think if we lower the bar, that's going to weaken the profession and jeopardize the future of the profession.
Good point. I like that. So does Ben or Pat, do you want to say anything else before we wrap up?
I would just say in general that I'm excited to see more cooperation between the subspecialties of podiatry. I had talked to Pat Agnew about this, and he's very sports medicine orientated as well, and he's an athlete, of why not have Louis DeCaro and all the great vendors that actually offer a lot of support to pediatrics and to biomechanics in general. When I went down to Austin and I was at the PFA event, Bob Schwartz invited me. It was a raffle at one of our sports medicine events. I learned a lot from this guy, Gooch, that's the Superfeet pedorthist. He's very succinct about the ideas about the contouring with what they're looking at devices, the heel cups. And as I mentioned before, they're not just industry people. They know specific bodies of knowledge that we can gain from and partner with, and then keep centering back to podiatry instead of this sort of nose up about, oh, you didn't do a reconstructive ankle for rear foot residency. We should be working together. I mean, I can tell you that I have a colleague down south of here that's been on your podcast, Tyson, and we were talking about these train wrecks of people that had surgery done, that there was no conservative treatment. And whether the x-rays looked good or bad, some of them resulted in non-unions. He's in a more rural area than I am. But that's just a sidebar of the fact that it sounds to me like there are some coming out in the profession that don't want to embrace all of what podiatry has to offer. And that's if I were to leave any mark on the profession, it would be more cross-pollination amongst the different subspecialties of podiatry to work together. It's like that old saying, join or die. Rising tides bring up all ships. So that's how I would end it in terms of what I think for the profession.
So Pat, what about you?
I did have. So one thing that we just kind of brushed against, and Patrick talking about his international medicine experience. I also had international medical experience. I just carried a weapon. But we do have the opportunity or multiple opportunities for practice setting. A podiatric physician and surgeon in the United States can work in a wound care center. They can have a private practice. They can work in a large group, a small group. They can work for the Veterans Administration. They can work for the Armed Forces. They can work at a Native American reservation as part of the Public Health Service, as a commissioned officer within Public Health Service. You can, at an academic medical center, achieve academic rank. You can work toward a professorship. So I've had the blessing, not necessarily from a fiscal or retirement perspective, but I've had the blessing of practicing in a lot of those different settings and reaping the rewards and challenges of each of those different settings. So it's not like you're locked into go to school, put up a shingle, and work until you die. It's not always that way in podiatry, and maybe that's not unique to podiatry, but it's an aspect that I don't think that, I don't know, Patrick, maybe should be mentioned more. Put some of our military podiatrists on show and say, hey, this is one of the career tracks that you could follow that could bring you some kind of unique opportunities and challenges.
Absolutely. I think the variety within the profession from an employment aspect, but also from a practice aspect, are attractive features to going into the profession. I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and I also just, my final words is, I think as a podiatrist, is the important part is finding what you enjoy the most in podiatry. And it doesn't mean that's what is going to be 100% of your day. But I think if you can find what you love doing in podiatry and you can be doing that more often than not, you're going to want to stay in the profession longer and you're going to enjoy going to work every day. If you're doing stuff you do not enjoy doing, it's going to be a drag.
I tell my residents a couple of things when they start and when they finish. I remind them of this. It's number one, put patients first, always. Number two, be a lifelong learner. And number three, leave the profession better than you found it. And I would add a fourth, that especially for those of us like Patrick, Agnew, and I who are involved in different organizations, profession first, organization second. If we all do that, everybody wins and the profession advances forward.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you three for coming on the Podiatry Legends podcast and sharing your thoughts in this particular area. And thank you very much.
Welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.